Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Audietis.
This episode of Nos Audietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Audietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going to
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
That Porter says cheated.
You want to win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Audietis. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today to help preview the Sounders Sporting Kansas City match is Jimmy Mack of KC Soccer Journal and No Other Pod. Welcome back to the show, Jimmy. It's been a while.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Always glad to be back and talk a little soccer between these two clubs.
Yeah, so let's start here. The last time we had you on, I think this was the last time we had you on. Certainly the last time the Sounders played Kansas City. A very similar situation, although maybe different. Sporting Kansas City, if you can remind way back towards the start of, little towards the start of last year, Kansas City was in the midst of a 10-game winless run to start the season. Things seemed to be going very bad. They, it looked like Peter Vermees was in real trouble at that point. Sounders had already beaten Kansas City in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas City comes into Seattle, maybe a little healthier than they had been up to that point, but they score a pretty decisive 2-1 win, and that ends up sparking a complete turnaround in the season. They end up being probably one of the best teams in the league from that point forward. They win a playoff round. They won 2 playoff rounds, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Were they in the play-in game?
They were in the play-in game. They
had to win 2. Yeah, they won 2.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they won 2 rounds, and got as far as the Sounders did in the playoffs. And then this season started out okay. Maybe not gangbusters, but certainly not
better than last year started.
Better than last year. But all of a sudden, as we come into this game, Kansas City in the midst of a 7-game losing streak, another 7-game losing streak, 10-game winless run.
Mm-hmm.
Is the situation different this year? Is it worse? Is it maybe not as bad?
No, it's a great question. I would say that the feeling among the majority of the Sporting Kansas City fan base, particularly the vocal portion of the Sporting Kansas City fan base, is the situation is worse right now than it was last year. And I mean, if you look at objectively where Sporting Kansas City is in standings in terms of points this year compared to last year, through 16 games in 2023, Sporting Kansas City had 16 points. They had started to turn it around after they got 3 points through their first 10 games.
Yeah.
They started to turn it around. 2024, through 16 games, they have 11 points. So 5 points worse than they were last year at this point. You mentioned winless in 10, 7-game losing streak in league play. Over that winless streak, they are 0 wins, 8 losses, 2 draws compared to the 0 wins, 7 losses, 3 draws they started 2023 with. What I would argue is the biggest difference, and where there was hope at this point last year for Sporting Kansas City, there is less hope at this point, is Sporting KC started 2023 off with significant injuries. They had 2 designated players in Gadi Kinda, a midfielder, and Alan Polito, the striker, who had missed the entirety of the 2022 season and were making their way back from injury to start 2023 and missed much of the first part of the season. So there was the built-in excuse of, well, two of our best players have yet to come back. Johnny Russell was injured, etc. That wasn't really the situation this year. This team started off pretty healthy, and there have been a couple injuries here and there, but they haven't been without two of their three designated players. They haven't really been without any of their designated players due to injury for the vast majority of this season. This team at this point is what it is. There isn't a series of reinforcements that are on their way back from injury that are going to suddenly turn the tide of this team like happened last year. And for one reason or another, it would seem like a team that should be better than they are on paper seems to be less than the sum of its parts right now.
Yeah. So if you kind of go back and you look at the way they started the season, they were 2, 1, and 3. I mean, I would say that was almost going according to plan at that point. But where there were signs of maybe distress, I think you go back to that loss, right, against the Galaxy, where they blow a lead in that one, blow a 2-goal lead relatively late
in the last 20 minutes of the match.
Right, last 20 minutes of the match, they lose that game 3-2, and then a couple weeks later, they blow a 3-0 lead to the Timbers at home. They have to settle for a tie in that one. And then they blew another lead, right, against Inter Miami the following week. And the narrative at that point was something like, geez, blowing these multi-goal leads seems bad. And I remember Vermees being asked about that, and he was like, oh, I don't know. That doesn't seem... What's the big deal here? And it seems, and I guess to their credit, they've stopped blowing leads, but they've also stopped getting leads, right?
Right. Yeah. So Sporting Kansas City, and I haven't looked at the updated numbers as of this week, but they haven't had a lead. At one point they had, as of at least a week or two ago, 17 points dropped from a winning position.
Not blowing multi-goal leads. They've been blowing leads, just not multi-goal leads.
Right. 17 points dropped from a winning position, which was most in the entire league. Yeah. And quite honestly, even though it started to really come to a head, like you said, with that Galaxy game at home, and then the Timbers game in particular. And the Timbers game was especially egregious because they were up 3-0. They earned a penalty. Willie Agata, the striker, had
that's right,
to step up and make it a 4-0 game, and ended up missing the penalty kick, which you think, okay, well, it's like the 60th minute. You got a 3-goal lead. 4 goals would be fun, but, chances are we're good. Nobody thought. But even in the second game of the season, it was a 1-1 draw at home against the Philadelphia Union. They gave up that goal ultimately to earn a draw at the death. It was literally the last action of the match before the whistle was blown. So this has been an issue for Sporting Kansas City throughout the year, just mental errors, not seeing games out. And you're right. Every time we asked Peter Vermees about it in the post-game press conference, it was along the lines of, we're doing things well, we're getting better, I'm not concerned. And my question always was, you say you're getting better, but objectively it continues to happen and the leads are getting larger and larger that are being blown. And then it really I can think of one press conference this year where he kind of actually showed a little fire and anger, and he questioned the effort of the players on the team. And then he came back the next week and he said, the effort was there. We just we ended up losing. So if the effort's there, but you're still losing, okay, well, then it's either the players aren't good enough or the system's not good enough. Something's not good enough. If the effort's there and you're still consistently losing, then at what point do you start looking at the system or the person responsible for the makeup of the roster?
Yeah, and so last week was another one of those games where he said, I actually liked what I saw. I think the line was something along the lines of, other than the 3 goals, I really liked what I saw.
Right.
And they lost 3-1 to Minnesota. I guess it's on the road. Minnesota's been good, so I guess you can sort of, if it's in a vacuum, you don't get freaked out about it. But at some point, 7 straight losses to be talking I can only imagine what it must be like covering. I mean, Brian Schmetzer sometimes drives us crazy, but he also isn't telling us that, no, actually, I'm really happy with the team at 7 after the 7th straight loss.
Right. Yeah. He said, other than the 3 goals, there was a lot of good stuff, which, the analogy I'm seeing a lot of people make is, other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln?
Mrs. Lincoln. Yeah.
But it wasn't just that. He was asked, what does this, which, it's somewhat of a cliche question, but what does this team need to do to turn this streak around? And his answer was, well, you have to win games. You have to score more goals than the other team.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, thank you.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of the feeling amongst a lot of sporting fans at this point, and is only continuing to grow louder, is there doesn't seem to be a lot of adjustment. There doesn't seem to be a lot of tactical or strategic shifts that happen, particularly in game, if something is not going well. Over the last couple of weeks, interestingly enough, Peter has decided to change the starting lineup a bit, and it's been much more what you would consider secondary or bench players that have filtered into the starting lineup, as opposed to Daniel Shallowy, Alan Polito, Johnny Russell, the people who you are probably familiar with. You're getting more of Steven Afrifa, Alenis Vargas, names that your listeners are probably not all that
unfamiliar with. I am unfamiliar with.
So on one hand, I guess you could say, well, credit to Peter for trying something, but on the other hand, it's still not working. So it's a disheartening position for sporting fans to be in, because it does not appear to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And there hasn't really been anything that Sporting has shown that gives you any indication that change may be coming. There's talks about the transfer window, et cetera, but at that point, too little, too late.
Yeah, I mean, as we are well aware here in Seattle, where we kind of have this similar but not maybe at the same level of frustrations, is we keep talking about the transfer window. Well, there's 8 games after the transfer. Like by the time the transfer window comes open, if you're really in a bad place, there's not a lot of runway left to correct it. There's a Leagues Cup, and I suppose you can, maybe make something happen in Leagues Cup, but as far as league play goes, you don't have a lot of room left to go. So I'm sitting here looking at, along the same lines of what you said, where there's not a lot of reason for hope. At least the narrative around Seattle has been, okay, well, they've been bad, but if you look at the underlying numbers, the underlying numbers are actually pretty encouraging. Well, if you look over at Kansas City, it is not the case. They are actually overperforming their expected goals by something like 10 goals. Like they're actually scoring really well, but the defense just seems to be in absolute tatters. They've allowed 31 goals. They're averaging basically 2 goals allowed a game here. And I'm not sure that the underlying numbers give any real reason for hope. I mean, is there, I don't know, how is that, how big of a narrative is that over there?
It's certainly a narrative. I think so. The attack started off decent to start the year, and then, I mean, I'm not really sure what happened, but suddenly, I don't know if age has finally caught up to this team. I mean, I think it's the oldest, if not one of the top 2 or 3 oldest average age starting lineups in the league. If you look at the, what would be considered the first choice starting 11. There is Eric Tommy is the central attacking midfielder. He plays the number 10 position. When he is either not on his game or unavailable, and his wife had a baby a couple weeks ago, so he was unavailable for the birth of his first child, understandable, etc. And as soon as he leaves, Peter said himself, we don't have another natural number 10 on the roster. We lose that direct attack up the middle. Sporting's chances, quality chances that they create, essentially vanish. And that's why you were correct when you mentioned they're near the top of the league in terms of goals scored to expected goals scored.
Right.
But that's because you look at a significant number of their goals, whether it be Jake Davis from the right back position or Johnny Russell, who just did this with a somewhat meaningless goal last week. They're scoring goals from 5, 6, 7 yards outside the box that are bangers, but they got individually, 0.01, 0.03 XG per attempt. This isn't a sustainable offensive attack over the long haul. And then on the defensive side, I would say it's a relatively athletic back line, and they tend to make a lot of mental errors. There's a lot of miscommunication. There's a lot of missed marks, particularly on set pieces. Sporting has allowed well into the double digits of set piece goals this year. They are simply not good defending set pieces. And it has been a problem, honestly, for a handful of years at Sporting Kansas City, and nobody can seem to fix it. We've asked Peter, we've asked the players, we've asked Tim Mealy, the goalkeeper. It continues to happen. It happened last week. They got caught unaware on a quick throw-in last week, and then center back got muscled off the ball. There was a mental lapse. Nobody was in the box to guard a Minnesota player who ended up just getting an easy tap in the goal. So mental errors. There's a little bit of youth on the back line at times. Jake Davis is a converted midfielder who plays right back, who's a solid player, but he's still learning the position. It just silly mental lapses along the back line that the athleticism unfortunately can't make up for.
Yeah, and digging a little bit more into the advanced analytics on here, you also you assume, you see these things, you start to assume, oh, they must have given up a whole bunch of penalties. No, not really. They've given up 2 penalties, only 1 goal there.
Mm-hmm.
The post shot XG is 32.
Mm-hmm.
They've given up 31. I mean, they're like, Malia is actually slightly performing above what you would expect. He's actually preventing goals that you would be expecting, and yet there's still, I mean, I say this as someone, like, I don't normally come into this thing. I'm always looking for, oh, what's the
silver lining?
What's the, and it's like, you just look at all these numbers just scream like crisis.
Right. And I think that's where, I mean, I said there haven't been tons of injuries, and there haven't. If there's one line that's been depleted from injuries more than the others, it's been the midfield. Mm-hmm. Remy Voltaire is the number 8. He plays sort of that box to box position. Eric Tommy's the number 10. Tommy, I think he's maybe missed 1 game with a hamstring injury, and then missed another one with the birth of his child, as I mentioned. But still, when one player and at most 2 players in the midfield for just a game or 2 go away, and the entire team just shuts down both offensively and defensively, then you start to wonder, okay, well, if there's truly no depth to the midfield, if there's nobody that can step in and stabilize the midfield, and then the offense is on an island in the attack, they're not getting the ball, the defense isn't getting any support from the midfield, so they're stepping up higher and they're making more mistakes. They're trying to play the offside trap. They're getting caught playing too high. Wingers get behind them. I know Seattle has some speed that they can potentially get behind the back line with. And if you look back to when they last played in Kansas City, it was a 4-1 drubbing. Now, Ben Sweat got a red card, which didn't help things, but it was already 2-0 at that point. So
2-1, I think, but yeah,
or 2. It was a 2-1.
Yeah, because Kansas State actually took a lead in that one.
That's right. Again,
scored right at the beginning.
Yeah, and then Jordan Morris and Leo Chu kind of took over the game. So it's just there, like you said, the advanced stats don't show a lot of room for hope. There isn't really an expectation for change strategically based on what fans have seen, and quite honestly, the ownership group has been pretty silent on everything. When sporting fans saw this past week that Atlanta United fired their manager, and Garth Lagerwey, who Seattle fans are very familiar with, sent out a letter to Atlanta fans basically saying, here's the expectation we set every single year. We were not living up to that expectation. We felt we needed to make a change, so we're doing it. Sporting fans looked at that letter and said, how hard is that to just communicate? What is the expectation of the club? And so the danger for Sporting now is they're teetering on the edge for many people of shifting from anger and frustration to apathy. And
right. And that's where it gets really dangerous, right?
Exactly. That's way more dangerous, especially when you have a team, I'm wearing it right now, the Kansas City Current over on the NWSL side, unbeaten, who have their brand new stadium and are just firing on all cylinders, and they're selling out game after game after game. Sporting's not the only soccer team in town anymore. And fan width is a real thing. If Sporting isn't gonna, make it worth people's time and money to drive all the way out to the stadium in Kansas City, Kansas, they'll go down to the Riverfront Stadium in downtown Kansas City and watch a team that knows how to win.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe if there's an explanation for all this, it might just be that KC Current has sucked out all the energy and I mean, this is like the most exciting team in North America right now, Casey.
Right.
Yeah. They are just flying. So I don't know, maybe that if we're looking for explanations for all this, maybe that's a good one, and good plug for KC Current, who are absolutely balling right now over and they I didn't realize that stadium that's like the stadium location that I'm sure in a if you were to plot if Sporting Kansas City were to come into the picture now, that's probably exactly where they would want to put that stadium too, isn't it?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, they had an opportunity to build a stadium way back when in Kansas City, Missouri, and then because of tax shenanigans, they ended up on the Kansas side. But yeah, I mean, but I do think there is an interesting parallel when you look at both of the teams, not just in terms of like obviously one's winning and one's not. There's excitement around one, there's not around the other, but the Current have dealt with their own injuries.
Right.
Bia Zanerato, their new forward, who's from Brazil this year, who's incredible. She missed 4 or 5 games with injury, but the Current have a roster that's been built that has depth where if a star player goes down for 4 or 5 games, there's enough quality behind them they can come in and continue to win and win in a different style. They won 5-4, 4-3 in the first handful of games, and then they've won 1-0 grudge matches. They can adapt in different ways when they need to, depending on the personnel that they have on the field. With Sporting, it feels so much like they have their 4-3-3 Sporting fit, possession-based system that plays like a pseudo high press. And regardless of the talent on the field, whether that is best suited for who's there, that's the system. And I think I could argue that Sporting doesn't have, especially on the front line in the midfield, the speed or athleticism to play the way they once did. And Peter hasn't really adapted the system to fit the unique talents of his players at this point.
So in your estimation, how is this a big game specifically? Is it like, I know from just a narrative perspective, or is Peter so Teflon, for lack of a better term, that it's like one game, really? It's not about any one game. It's really about some larger issue.
Yeah, I have no indication that ownership is preparing to make a move anytime soon. I would guess that at minimum, since Sporting Kansas City is in the quarterfinals for the U.S. Open Cup, that they're not going to make a move as long as there's still a chance for a trophy in front of them. They win 3 more games and they have a home field advantage for at least the quarter and semifinals should they defeat FC Dallas in the quarterfinals. They'll then host the semifinal game. I don't think they're going to make a foundation-shattering move until, at minimum, they're out of the U.S. Open Cup. The other thing that makes this hard, and this is, again, sort of ownership shooting themselves in the foot a little bit, is before the 2023 season, they signed Peter Vermees to a contract extension through 2028.
Oh,
so he has 4.5 more years on his contract as of right now.
4.5 years.
4.5 through the 2028 season.
Wow.
So we're in 2024. They still got to get through 25, 26, 27, 28, and then he's out of contract.
Yeah, that's some security. That's so maybe that explain. I guess that would kind of explain a guy who's not too worried about his job security. Like even, I mean, he's got 4 years. He's owed 4 more years of
right. And he doesn't have a sporting director or a technical director or anybody that he answers to. Even when they did the weird 8-day period where they hired Gavin Wilkinson as a sporting director, which was,
I forgot about
a whole
that
podcast on that. Gavin Wilkinson, as the sporting director, was going to report to Peter Vermees. Peter Vermees was still going to be the highest person. So they say they're still looking for a sporting director. And I could argue that the biggest thing, Peter could still potentially be a successful coach if he can focus on being a coach. I would say his roster building and his contract decisions that he's made are his biggest flaw at this point that haven't aged well. But what sporting director out there is going to want to have to report up through the head coach, knowing that that's not typically how MLS clubs are run anymore? If you look at the successful clubs now, it's not how it works.
Yeah, so you're basically looking to hire an assistant GM to report to the coach, who also reports to himself.
Exactly. Peter is the highest soccer official for the club. There is a president of Sporting Kansas City. It's Jake
Right.
Reed. He just runs the business side of things. He has
Right.
nothing to do with the technical or sporting side of the game. So in the club for the last 10, 12, years, more than a decade, has been built from the academy up in the image of Peter Vermees.
And so, I wasn't planning on getting into this, but since you bring it up, I am just curious. Has there been any long-term fallout from the Gavin Wilkinson thing? I mean, that was an amazing week of kind of the news seemed to come out of nowhere, and then it was, you guys are crazy. What are you doing here? Why are you questioning this? To like a couple of days later, like, oh yeah, we fired that guy. Of course we did.
Yeah,
We had no idea.
Functionally, I would say no, there hasn't been, and quite honestly, there were a number of us in who cover the team who continued to try to ask about it, but we are, the vast majority of us, independent media who do not have large
Right.
media companies behind us. We don't have the resources to push and push and push. So when we ask the questions, and there was a press conference that was the next day after they announced that they had partnered with this, and 3 of us asked 3 times in a row, 3 different ways, what the deal was, and we basically got told, we're not going to talk about that. We've issued the statement. That's the last we're going to talk about it, and we can end the press conference right now if you want to keep talking about that. And so at a certain point, the club didn't want to play ball. They didn't want to answer anything. Now, what I will say, even though functionally it hasn't really impacted the day-to-day operations of the club, I do see more and more fans when they're talking about, does ownership even care about the club? Does, like, what made this team successful, especially after the rebrand, was they really connected with the fan base and with the city. And there's more and more of a narrative saying they've lost sight of what once made this club so great, which was that connection and the mutual respect for the fans. They showed it with the Gavin Wilkinson thing. They're showing it with the way that they've treated pricing and whatnot, and it's just causing fans to be disillusioned and apathetic. So, and that, like we said before, that's where I think they get into real danger.
Well, maybe this was an effort to change around that apathy, but one of the funnier things today was a reporter who covers the team here stumbled across this line, and it's in the lead. It's a by the numbers story on the Sporting Kansas City website, and the lead is, one of Major League Soccer's most unlikable teams will visit Children's Mercy Park. And it was just like, where did like, we're just catching strays. I have never really, I mean, I shouldn't say there was a time up until about 2016 where I felt like there was a genuine on-field rivalry between the Sounders and Sporting Kansas City that was mostly fueled by, they were both very competitive at that point. They were both competing for trophies. They had met in the U.S. Open Cup final. 2016 obviously was the year the Sounders went on a run, but it was sparked by a somewhat controversial win over Sporting Kansas City in the first round of that. And they had all these tightly contested matches, but really on the field since then, there have been some flashpoints, but they've been mostly Sounders aggrieved by them. There was, which I don't even know if you guys even remember this, but Stephen Fry getting called for a penalty when he was punching a ball out and Dom Dwyer, if you remember this or not.
Yeah.
And so that, but Sporting Kansas City comes out on top of that one. And then there's the Tim Malia rock bottom on Christian Roldan. Again, Sounders fans feel aggrieved over it.
Yep.
Kansas City, they got whatever best, they won the game. They went on to the playoffs. No harm there.
Yep.
And I'm just, where did this come from? Is this just to see it from an official like an official source like this, just like stuns you a little bit.
It's a little, it caught me off guard too. This is not the type of thing. So they put out this by the numbers article where it's basically supposed to get like, hey, this is how it's gone the last few times these teams have played. This is where they rank statistically, etc. They've messed with St. Louis City a bit in these because that's an actual legitimate rivalry that has continued to grow over the last couple of years since St. Louis came into the league. I don't know why they took a shot at Seattle now of all times. I mean, I know it's communication staff members who write this stuff, and they're typically written like more along the lines of press releases and such. But I mean, if I'm being generous, I think about, as somebody who has a podcast that covers Sporting Kansas City every week, and we go to the press conferences and ask the same questions and get the same answers. And I've said many a time this year, there's only so many times you can say the same thing.
Right.
Maybe they got bored And they were like, I don't know, I'll spice something up a little bit.
Yeah,
and
sure.
get a
Yeah,
reaction.
yeah.
Maybe I'll try to invigorate the Sporting fans a little bit. Come watch the most unlikable team and sort of make Seattle the villain. And yeah, historically, Seattle's one of the most successful clubs in the league. It's
Right.
just, it's a funny year to pick it because Seattle's been having their struggles, even though they're doing better than Sporting this year. And I don't think it's going to land. And I haven't seen it land with Sporting fans in a way that's like rallying. It's more just like, okay, not now. Like,
Right.
this is not what we need. So it's different. I haven't seen that before. I wouldn't have thought that this was the week to pull that one out of the hat.
Right. Yeah, exactly. For a playoff game, no animal, whatever. Like, you got to do what you got to do. But this just felt very, okay, sure.
Out of
Why
left
not?
field, weird, whatever. I mean, if anything, I would be concerned that, okay, you just gave Seattle bulletin board material.
Right.
Why are we doing that?
It was funny. We asked Brian Schmetzer about it today, and he was like, well, I know Peter Vermees wouldn't say that.
It is a good question. I do wonder because, they have changed their communication strategies before at the request of Peter. They changed when they put the lineup graphic out until before kickoff now, because it used to be that they would put it out an hour before. Now they just do a list of names because Peter doesn't want to give any tactical information away. When surprise, it's going to be a 4-3-3 that's the same that it's always been. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he was like, hey, let's not. But I don't know.
Yeah, that's I always get a kick out of the lineup graphic thing. Like, the Sounders have been pretty consistent about that. And it was funny the other day, actually, Brian was giving the communication staff a hard time because he wanted it to be a surprise that, Obed Vargas was playing on the right instead of in the middle, and they put it in the graphic that he was playing on the right. And he was like, oh, and they won the game.
Sure.
Which is like, of course, like, it makes it like as if that was a
right.
Anyway, but I always just think it's funny the way that teams get all up in their feelings about, especially like lineup graphics. But
yeah,
Jimmy, I feel like we need to end on some sort of like positive note, because I don't intend to come in here and just dunk on anyone, especially since, like, this is, like, at the end of the day, this is MLS. I would not be at all surprised to see Kansas City win this game.
Sure.
If they let's cast it this way. If this goes the way Kansas City wants it to, what happens? Like, what's the scenario you imagine where this comes out with the Kansas City win?
It starts with Eric Tommy in the middle of the field, him back there at the number 10, being that creative force in the midfield. Peter said the thing that's lacking in the attack is a direct attack up the middle. We cannot just simply rely on hoping Daniel Shallowy or Johnny Russell out on the wings can just whip in crosses and hope that somebody gets ahead to it. It just simply won't work. So if Eric Tommy can get in there and play his game and be that creative spark in the midfield. And I mean, Alan Polito's getting paid $3-something million a year to be a designated player striker. He's got the skill. He's just been in such poor form all year. He and Tommy together can play off each other very well. So Sporting would need to score 2 or 3 goals. And then, they probably would still give up a goal somewhere, probably later in the match if things were going about as well as they could. But if everything went perfectly for Sporting, you're looking at best case scenario, probably a 2-1 or 3-1 victory. But that's sort of been the story of this club. In order for them to win, things have to go perfect. And it's not a realistic expectation to go perfect every week. The only silver lining, I guess you could say, of this season, even beyond this game for Sporting fans, is sort of that transfer window hope that somebody could come in. But like you said, there's just not a lot of games after the transfer window.
Yeah. And just real quick, are there any notable absences for this game? I know it's during an international break, which normally would be a time when I would expect both of these teams to be missing a few pieces. The Sounders, not really. Like, Nuhu is the only projected starter who is away on international duty.
Yeah. Remy Voltaire, he's the box-to-box midfielder. He's been out for a couple of games. He did not practice today. We don't have the official injury report as of yet. He would be the big one who would be missed. Danny Rosero is a starting center back. He did not practice today, but Peter Vermees just said he was, quote, fatigued, so they expect him to play. But Remy Voltaire, he would be the only one. However, I will say, even if he can't go, Sporting's really only addition last year was Memo Rodriguez, who's a midfielder who played largely with the Houston Dynamo in his career. He's actually been pretty good for Sporting this year. So if he can slot in and play that 8 behind or alongside Eric Tommy at the 10, should be fine. But Remy Voltaire is the one to keep an eye out for.
Good stuff, Jimmy. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I don't know. I would imagine it gets a little old, tiring talking about some of this stuff, but I appreciate you informing us and letting us know what's going on. Obviously, Kansas City. I don't know if it's hard for me to call Kansas City a rival. Everyone at this point feels like there's a reason to be rivals with.
Right.
If you're a Sounders fan and you've been around long enough, but I do think Kansas City still has a special place in Sounders' place for antipathy.
Yeah, and I think if Sporting were to somehow win this game against Seattle, I mean, Sporting fans would love to beat Seattle. There is a history, even if it hasn't been there as vibrantly over the past couple of years. It's always fun to beat Seattle if you're a Sporting fan, and I'm sure,
of course,
after some of the shenanigans recently, it's always fun to put Sporting in their place if you're a Sounders fan.
Yeah, no, very true, very true. But I do want to give people a recommendation to go check out KC Soccer Journal. Like Sounder Heart, they are also kind of plotting this post SB Nation path forward. It's great to see that you guys are going strong. No Other Pod is, you can listen to you guys as well. Jimmy, thank you so much for doing this, and may the world give you something interesting to talk about.
Yeah, well, last time I did this, like you said, we were on our 10-game winless streak, and
I know
went into Lumen and won. So maybe I need to do this again to break the curse now.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I'm Jeremiah Shan. This is Nos Audietes, and we will catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one.